Hey guys, welcome to another episode here. So before we get started, let's take a look at these two Martini-Henrys. Notice anything odd about them? I think it's a Mark II or Mark III, although I'm not a Martini expert enough to know which one is what. But let me ask, can you tell which one's the fake and which one's the real? No? Yes? Either way, let's move on to these two Lee Enfields. Which one can you tell is the fake one? Which one can you tell is the real one? Both of them look like short magazine Lee Enfield SMLE number 1s, but which one's real and which one's fake? Now, let's look at this monstrosity. We're going to come back to that later. That's an interesting bit. So, of the examples that you just saw, one of them is an actual Lee Enfield, one of them is an actual Martini-Henry. However, the other Lee Enfield and the other Martini-Henry is actually made in Pakistan and is actually a fake. A lot of the gun making that you see, the hand gun making stuff, is taking place in a very small part of Pakistan in a village called Darra Adam Khel. So this village is in a part of Pakistan called the Fatwa areas, or the federally administrated tribal areas. So a lot of people confuse Darra Adam Khel as being in Peshawar, but this is actually incorrect, as Peshawar is the provincial capital of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, which in Pashto means the Khyber portion of Pashto land. So the historical basis for the gun-making markets in Darra Adam Khel is actually a really fascinating story. It is the worst-case scenario of a gun control scheme that has backfired. Back in the early 1900s and late 1800s, there were a number of different conflicts between British in India and today what we know as Pakistan, and with the Afghan rulers in Afghanistan and in Kabul. On the frontier regions, Britain outlawed the sale of firearms and the possession of firearms to anywhere in Pakistan in order to not allow these tribes to rise up against the British. And the local Pashtun tribes realized they still needed to try to find a way to fight the British. They couldn't smuggle in small arms otherwise, so they said, well, guess what? If we can't have them, if we can't get them, we'll make them ourselves. And this was how the local gun-making manufacturing capability within the region was developed in the early 1800s. Of course, between the 1800s and the 1980s, the output of small arms was very minimal. However, with the increasing involvement of the Soviet Union in Afghanistan against the Mujahideen, there is a great need for small arms of locally made Kalashnikovs, of locally made Lee Enfields, of all sorts of stuff that the Mujahideen could use. At the same time, the CIA, through ISI and through some of the Saudis, were supplying the Mujahideen with legitimate small arms from all over the world. So you have legitimate small arms coming into the country being used by the Mujahideen, and you also have some of the small arms that are being manufactured by the gun makers in Darra Adam Khel and some of the surrounding cities. The most fascinating bit about all these small arms that we're going to see on TFB TV is all this stuff is copied and handmade and almost made to a one-to-one replica of what the original small arm was. As you might have seen earlier, unless you were an enthusiast of Martini-Henrys or Lee Enfields, it would be very difficult to tell apart the difference between the small arms that we saw earlier with the Martini-Henrys and the Lee Enfields. And this is generally the case for a number of other Kalashnikovs and handguns. The ability for some of these gunsmiths to reproduce these small arms is unparalleled throughout the world. It has been said that it only takes about 10 days for a Pashtun gunsmith to reproduce a given rifle that is just thrust into his hands. So with the Martini-Henrys, as you've seen earlier, if you guessed correctly, the Martini-Henry on the bottom is actually the original, and the Martini-Henry on the top is the one from Darra Adam Khel. One of the bits that we've heard about the Martini-Henry is that for a number of Martini-Henrys coming out of the region, they've actually stamped the same serial number on several thousand of them. So they copied it almost to a fault in that they made the exact same serial number every time. Later on, with Lee Enfields and some other different weapons, I believe this changed and some of the gunsmiths realized to have different numbers. But it's still kind of funny to realize that the Martini-Henry serial number is the same on almost several thousand rifles. Moving on to the short magazine Lee Enfield, we can kind of see where some of the differences are. I mean, you'll see the little hinge on the butt plate. You'll see some of the parts, they just look a little bit out of whack. And if you can't already tell, the SMLE on the bottom is the original and the SMLE on top is a Darra Adam Khel remake. You can also look at with the rear sight, how it slides up and down. The spring isn't really in place. The thing doesn't lock as well as the original Lee Enfield does. You can tell by looking at some of the markings that they're not marked into the metal as they really should be. You can also see the bayonet mounting fixture at the front of the muzzle is sort of coming off of the Darra Adam Khel version, and that doesn't really happen on the Lee Enfield one, even though they're probably around the same age, to be honest. The next example we have up here is a legitimate number 4 Lee Enfield that has simply been modified by gunsmiths in Darra Adam Khel, and they've added a weaver rail to the top of the rifle for putting on a various commercial scope. They've also taken a sort of spray paint or just regular paint and covered the wooden stock with this paint, probably to make it blend into the surroundings more, maybe to make it more appealing for customers that are thinking of buying the rifle. Who knows at this point? And finally, we have this 8mm monstrosity, which is if a Kalashnikov AKMS and a Mauser Action ever had babies with a Bren magazine inspired design, this is probably what we'd see. For those of you who are interested in learning more about the Kalashnikov copies that the guys in Darra Adam Khel put through, fear not, because we'll have a future episode just devoted to Kalashnikovs that come out of this gun making town. But when it comes to this 8mm thing, I don't even know what the original gunsmiths were thinking of when they were making this. Probably it satisfied some customer requirement to have a large capacity 8mm Mauser Action that could be tucked away in a vehicle or something. We'll probably never know. Either way, what we're looking at is essentially a Mauser Action fitted into a handcrafted copy of a Kalashnikov with probably an original AKMS fold-in stock on the back as well. You can see it has a safety, it has a bolt, it also has a removable magazine that appears to be very Bren inspired in that it's very long. You can also see that the AKMS stock folds just like a regular AK, and it folds around down to the foregrip. Also, by looking on top, you can notice that the gas system that then a Kalashnikov should rely on is actually non-existent in this example, and it actually doesn't do anything and is essentially just for looks. However, surprisingly, I would say that the fit and the finish of this particular design isn't too shabby compared to what other designs are that we've seen before and that we'll see in the future as well. Thanks very much for watching, guys. I really appreciate you tuning into this episode on the rarely covered topic of small arms coming out of Darra Adam Khel in Pakistan. I would really like to thank Ventura Munitions. They were a big help to producing these videos and getting the kinds of camera equipment and other sorts of stuff that we need. In addition, I'd also like to thank the Royal Armories and the National Firearms Center in Leeds in the United Kingdom for allowing us to film some of these amazing artifacts and to be able to bring some of these firearms to you and appreciate them in a historical context outside of the politics of where they're produced. Until then, make sure you stay Condition 1.